and I was drawn to it. I didn't approach her right away. I watched her for a moment, trying to understand how someone could be so carefree. When I finally worked up the courage, I made a joke about the weather. She smiled, and everything changed. We spent hours talking that day. She told me about her dreams, and I shared mine. Felt like I had known her forever. We didn't exchange numbers immediately. Instead, we promised to meet again at the same spot the next weekend. She kept her promise. So did I. Things moved quickly after that. We had our first date at a small coffee shop. We spent hours there, ignoring the world outside. I told her things I'd never told anyone. She listened like no one else had. When she spoke, her words felt like home. We got married a year later. The wedding was small, just family and a few friends. I didn't care about the details. I only cared about her. She looked at me that day like I was the only person in the world. I believed it. Our first apartment was tiny, but we made it ours. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Every night felt like an adventure. We cooked together, laughed at nothing, and made plans for a future that seemed limitless. When she told me she was pregnant, I cried. I wasn't expecting the news, but it felt like the start of something bigger than us. We decorated the nursery together. She chose the colors. I built the crib. We were a team always. The first few years with our son were hard but beautiful. He had her smile. She loved him fiercely. Watching her be a mother made me love her even more. I thought we were unbreakable. But then things changed. It started with small things. She began working late. She was on her phone more often. I told myself it was nothing. She was just busy. We all get busy. I didn't want to be the insecure husband. I trusted her. I trusted us. One night, she told me she was going out with friends. I stayed home with our son. She kissed me goodbye, and I felt a twinge of something I couldn't name. I shook it off. I didn't want to doubt her. But then I saw it. She came home late, smelling like someone else. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I wanted to believe her when she said she loved me. I wanted to believe everything was fine. But it wasn't. The next day I followed her. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I'd find nothing. But I did. I saw her with him. They were laughing just like we used to. She kissed him and my world fell apart. I confronted her that night. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to explain. She just looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. I saw the distance that had grown between us. I saw the lies she had told herself, the lies I had believed. I couldn't stay. I couldn't look at her and not see him. I couldn't look at her and not see the betrayal. I packed my things and left. I took our son with me. He didn't understand, but I couldn't leave him with her. Not after what she had done. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. I still loved her. I hated myself for it. I hated that I couldn't let her go, even after everything. I hated that I still missed her laugh, her smile, her touch. The months after were a blur. I threw myself into work, into raising our son. I didn't talk about her. I didn't talk about what happened. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't move on. But I couldn't. I saw her a few times after that. She tried to talk to me, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't let her words touch me. I couldn't risk believing her again. People told me to forgive her. They said it would help me heal. But I couldn't. Forgiveness felt like letting her win. Felt like erasing everything she had done. Felt like betraying myself. But the truth is, I miss her. I miss the life we had. I miss the person I thought she was. I miss the way she made me feel. I miss the way we were before everything fell apart. I don't know if I'll ever move on. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving her. But I do know this, I deserve better. I deserve someone who chooses me every day. I deserve someone who doesn't make me question my worth. And someday I'll find that. Someday, I'll look back on this and feel nothing. Someday I'll be okay. But today is not that day. Today I'm still broken. Today I'm still picking up the pieces. Today I'm still trying to figure out how to live without her. And that's okay. Because healing takes time. And I have all the time in the world. Some days are better than others. I get through the mornings without thinking of her, but the nights are harder. It's in the quiet moments when my son is asleep and the house is still that the memories creep in. The way she used to trace patterns on my hand. The way her laugh echoed in every corner of this home. The way her hair smelled when I held her close. I hate those nights. I hate the silence because it feels like she's still here, haunting me. I hate that my mind replays everything, like I could somehow rewrite the ending if I think hard enough. I try to focus on my son. He's my anchor. He doesn't know the full story, and I don't plan on telling him anytime soon. He's too young to understand, and I don't want him to carry the weight of her choices. He asks about her sometimes, and I tell him she loves him. Because she does. I know she does in her way. But love wasn't enough. That's the hardest part to accept. Love wasn't enough to keep her faithful. Love wasn't enough to keep her from destroying us. And if love isn't enough, then what is? That's the question that keeps me up at night. I've tried to move on. I've gone on a few dates, but it feels hollow. Every conversation feels like a performance. Every smile feels forced. I compare them all to her even though I don't want to. It's not fair to them and it's not fair to me. So I stop trying. Instead, I focus on the little things. Mornings with my son, when he climbs into bed with me and demands pancakes. Afternoons at the park where he runs wild and carefree. Evenings when he falls asleep in my arms and I feel like maybe, just maybe, I'm enough for him. But there's still a part of me that wonders what could have been. If I had been better, stronger, more attentive, would she have stayed? Would she have chosen me? It's a dangerous line of thought, and I try to push it away. I know it's not my fault, but the doubts linger. The worst part is that I still see her in everything. The way the sunlight hits the kitchen window reminds me of the mornings we spent drinking coffee and planning our day. The scent of lavender reminds me of her shampoo. Even the sound of certain songs takes me back to moments I wish I could forget. I haven't told anyone the full story. My friends know bits and pieces, but I keep most of it to myself. It's easier that way. They wouldn't understand. They'd tell me to move on, to forget her, to focus on the future. But how do you forget someone who was your everything? How do you let go of the person who held your heart in their hands? I don't have the answers. I don't know if I ever will. All I know is that I'm trying. I'm trying to be a good father. I'm trying to rebuild my life. I'm trying to find joy in the small moments. Some days I even succeed. I laugh with my son and it feels real. I read him stories and for a little while the world feels okay. I watch him sleep and I think about how lucky I am to have him. He's my reason for everything. He's the reason I get up in the morning, even when I don't want to. He's the reason I keep going, even when it feels impossible. And maybe that's enough. Maybe I don't need all the answers right now. Maybe it's okay to take it one day at a time. Maybe healing isn't about forgetting her, but about finding a way to live with the memories. I still don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever love again. I don't know if I'll ever trust again. But I do know this. I won't let her define me. I won't let her choices destroy me. I won't let her betrayal be the end of my story. Because I'm more than what she did to me. I'm more than the pain she caused. I'm more than the man she left behind. And someday I'll prove it. Not to her, but to myself. Someday I'll look back on all of this and see how far I've come. Someday I'll be whole again. But until then, I'll keep moving forward. For me. For my son. For the life we deserve. Because we deserve better. And we're going to find it. One step at a time. One day at a time. And that's enough. For now, that's enough. The hardest part isn't the pain. It's not the betrayal. It's not even the loneliness that creeps in during the quiet hours of the night. The hardest part is the questions. The endless, relentless questions that keep turning over in my mind, demanding answers I'll never have. Why wasn't I enough? Why did she choose him? Why did she stay so long if she wasn't happy? I replay everything like a tape on a loop. Every laugh, every kiss, every promise. I think about the nights we stayed up talking about nothing and everything, the days we spent building our life together. How did it all lead to this? How did the woman I trusted with my life become a stranger before my eyes? I try not to let the bitterness take root. I've read enough stories to know what happens when you let anger consume you. Poisons everything. It steals the joy from the moments that still matter. I don't want to be that man, the one who can't let go, the one who lets the past define him. But some nights, the anger wins. Some nights, I picture him. I picture the way she must have looked at him, the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she gave him the pieces of herself that were supposed to be mine. And it burns. It burns in a way I didn't know was possible. I've thought about confronting him. I've thought about showing up at his door, demanding answers he'll never give me. But I know it won't change anything. It won't undo what happened. It won't make her come back. And even if it did, I don't think I'd want her anymore. Not the version of her that did this. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets it. If she lies awake at night thinking about what she threw away. If she misses the life we built together. I wonder if she looks at our son and feels the weight of what she did. I wonder if she realizes what she lost. But then I remember the look on her face that night. The calm, almost detached way she admitted it. There was no regret in her eyes. No shame. No guilt. Just a quiet resignation. Like she had already made peace with her choices long before I found out. And that's what hurts the most. Not the betrayal itself, but the ease with which she let go. The way she seemed so unaffected by the destruction she caused. Like our life together was just another chapter she could close without a second thought. I started going to therapy. I didn't want to at first. It felt like admitting defeat, like admitting I couldn't handle this on my own. But the truth is, I can't. I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. The therapist says it's not my fault. She says I need to stop blaming myself for her choices. She says I need to focus on healing, on rebuilding, on finding my own sense of peace. I nod and tell her I'll try, but it feels impossible most days. Still, I keep going. Week after week, I show up and talk about the things I've kept buried for too long. The shame, the anger, the heartbreak. The way I still miss her, even though I know I shouldn't. The way I still love her, even though she doesn't deserve it. It's helping slowly. I've started to see things differently. I've started to realize that her betrayal says more about her than it does about me. It wasn't a reflection of my worth or my love or my effort. It was a reflection of her own flaws, her own insecurities, her own inability to appreciate what she had. And yet, there's a part of me that still wishes things could have been different. A part of me that wishes she had chosen me, that she had fought for us, that she had been the person I thought she was. But wishing doesn't change reality. It doesn't rewrite the past. It doesn't fix what's broken. So I focus on what I can control. I focus on being the best father I can be. I focus on creating a life for my son that's full of love and stability and hope. I focus on the future, even when the past feels like an anchor pulling me back. And some days I feel like I'm making progress. Some days, I laugh without feeling the weight of her absence. Some days, I look at my son and see a future that's brighter than the one I imagined with her. But other days, the grief still hits me like a wave, crashes over me, dragging me under, making it hard to breathe. And in those moments, I remind myself that it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to mourn the life I thought I had, the love I thought was real. Because healing isn't linear. It's messy and painful and unpredictable. But it's also necessary. It's the only way to move forward, to find peace, to rebuild. And that's what I'm doing, one day at a time, one step at a time, one breath at a time. I'm rebuilding. I'm healing. I'm learning to live again. And someday, I'll look back on this chapter of my life and see it for what it was. A lesson, a turning point, a painful but necessary part of my journey. Someday I'll be okay. And until then, I'll keep trying. For me, for my son, for the future we deserve. Because we do deserve it. Both of us. And I won't stop until we find it. Months turned into a year. And while life continued to march forward, there were still moments where the past felt like a weight around my neck. I've learned how to smile when people ask how I'm doing. I've learned to say better when they press for details. But the truth is complicated, and not something I can fit into casual conversations. My son, though, he's my saving grace. He's the reason I can find laughter in the smallest things. There's something about the way he sees the world, so pure, so untouched by the complexities of adult pain. Every time I see him play, every time he asks me a question that makes me laugh, I feel like maybe I'm doing something right. We've created our own routines. Saturday mornings are pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons are park days. I've learned to braid his wild curls, even though he giggles every time I fumble with the hair ties. And every night, before he falls asleep, he asks me to tell him a story. Sometimes I make up tales of knights and dragons, and other times, I tell him about when he was little, how his first steps were in the kitchen, or how he used to giggle uncontrollably whenever I tickled his toes. But even in those moments, when life feels steady and full of love, there's a shadow, a memory, a presence that lingers in the back of my mind. It's not just about Emily anymore. It's about what her betrayal represents, how fragile everything in life can be, how even the strongest foundations can crumble. I've seen her a few times since we split. At first, it was only in passing, at the grocery store, at a mutual friend's event where neither of us expected the other. Each time, it felt like my heart stopped for just a moment. I wondered if it was the same for her, but her expression was always neutral, like she was a ghost drifting through my life, untouchable. And then there was the day she came to my door. It was late. I had just put our son to bed, and I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels without really watching anything. When the knock came, I froze. I knew it was her before I even opened the door. Somehow, I always knew. She looked the same but different. Her eyes carried something I couldn't place. Something that wasn't there the last time we stood face to face. She hesitated before speaking, and for a moment, I wondered if she would turn around and leave without saying anything. Part of me hoped she would. "I just wanted to talk," she said finally. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. I didn't want to let her in, but I also didn't want to have this conversation on the porch. So I stepped aside, and she walked in. The house felt smaller with her in it, like her presence was pressing in on the walls. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the photos of our son. I could see the emotion in her face, but I didn't offer her any comfort. I didn't know how. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not here to ask for it." "Then why are you here?" My voice sounded sharper than I intended, but I didn't apologize. She took a deep breath and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like forever. "Because I need you to know that it wasn't about you. It was never about you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that it didn't matter if it was about me or not, that she had still destroyed everything we built together, that she had still shattered the life we shared. But I didn't. I just stood there, silent, waiting for her to say more. "I was broken," she continued. "I didn't know how to fix myself, and instead of trying, I ran. I made choices that I'll regret for the rest of my life. But I never stopped loving you. I need you to know that." I didn't respond, couldn't, because part of me wanted to believe her, and that part scared me more than anything. She stayed for a little while longer, talking about things that didn't matter, her job, her family, her attempts to find her own version of peace. When she finally left, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel closure. I just felt empty. That night, I sat in the dark, replaying her words over and over. I wanted them to mean something. I wanted them to erase the pain, to rewrite the story, to make everything okay again. But they didn't. They couldn't. Because love isn't enough. Not when trust has been broken. Not when betrayal has carved a permanent scar into your heart. Love isn't enough to undo the damage she caused. But as I sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I realized something. I didn't need her to fix me. I didn't need her to explain or justify or apologize. I didn't need anything from her anymore. Because for the first time, I understood that healing wasn't about her. It was about me. It was about letting go of the weight I'd been carrying, about choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. It was about finding my own peace, my own strength, my own sense of self. And as I looked at the photos of my son, the pieces of my life that still held meaning, I knew I could do it. I knew I could find a way to heal, to rebuild, to create a future that was brighter than the one I lost. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But I'll get there. One day, one step, one moment at a time. And when I do, I'll be ready to write the next chapter of my life. A chapter that's mine, and mine alone. Weeks turned into months after that night she came to my door. Her words lingered, though I wished they wouldn't. Every time I thought I'd made progress, every time I felt like I was finally moving forward, they'd echo in my mind. It wasn't about you. What did that even mean? Was it supposed to absolve me of blame? Was it meant to soften the blow of what she'd done? Because it didn't. It only deepened the wound. It only made me question everything more. If it wasn't about me, then why did it feel so personal? Why did it tear me apart as if I'd been the one who failed? I spent those months throwing myself into fatherhood. My son was growing so fast, and I didn't want to miss a moment. I volunteered at his school, joined him on field trips, and signed us up for weekend soccer games. He was terrible at soccer, more interested in picking flowers on the sidelines than chasing the ball. But I didn't care. Watching him laugh, hearing his voice calling out to me, those were the moments that reminded me I still had something to fight for. But even as I poured my energy into him, the loneliness didn't go away. It crept in at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the empty side of the bed pressed down on me. I started leaving the TV on, just for the noise, just to drown out the silence. It helped, but only a little. I avoided dating for a long time. The thought of starting over, of putting myself out there, was exhausting. How could I trust anyone after what happened? How could I let someone get close to me when I knew how easily it could all fall apart? But one day, a friend, Jason, who'd known me since college, sat me down and said something I couldn't ignore. You're not living, he told me. You're surviving, and that's fine for a while. But at some point, you have to start living again. He wasn't wrong. I knew he wasn't wrong. But knowing and doing are two very different things. Still, his words stayed with me. A few weeks later, I found myself downloading a dating app, my fingers hovering over the screen as I debated whether I was really ready for this. The first few matches were disasters. One woman spent the entire date talking about her ex, and another seemed more interested in her phone than in me. I wanted to give up, to tell myself it wasn't worth it, but something kept me going. Maybe it was Jason's voice in the back of my head, or maybe it was the tiny spark of hope I hadn't been able to extinguish. Then I met Rachel. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't flashy or overly confident. She was quiet, almost shy, but there was something about her that drew me in. We met for coffee, and what was supposed to be a quick meeting turned into hours of conversation. She asked about my son, about my work, about the things that made me who I was. She didn't flinch when I told her about Emily. She didn't press for details or offer empty platitudes. She just listened. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more often. I introduced her to my son cautiously, unsure of how he'd react. But he loved her instantly. She had a way of making people feel at ease, of making them feel seen. I found myself smiling more when I was around her, laughing in a way I hadn't in years. But as much as I liked her, as much as I wanted to let her in, there was still a wall between us. I couldn't bring myself to fully open up. Every time I felt myself getting too close, I pulled back, afraid of what might happen if I let her see all the broken pieces inside me. One night, after we'd been seeing each other for a few months, she called me out on it. "You're holding back," she said. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just honest. "I know you've been hurt, and I'm not asking you to forget that. But if you're not willing to let me in, this isn't going to work." I didn't know what to say. She was right, but admitting it felt like exposing a wound I'd been trying to hide. "I'm scared," I finally admitted. "I'm scared of getting hurt again, of trusting someone and finding out it was a mistake." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I can't promise you I'll never hurt you," she said. "No one can. But I can promise you that I'll try. That I'll do everything I can to be someone you can trust." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was real. And in that moment, I realized that maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need guarantees or certainty. Maybe I just needed someone who was willing to try. So I took a leap. I let her in little by little, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wanted to run, when the fear of getting hurt again felt like too much to bear. But I stayed. I stayed because she was worth it, and because I was starting to believe that maybe I was worth it too. It's been a year since I met Rachel, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm truly living. She's not Emily, and that's a good thing. She doesn't try to fill the void Emily left. Instead, she helps me build something new, something better. And while the scars from my past haven't disappeared, they don't define me anymore. They're just a part of my story, a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come. I don't know what the future holds. None of us do. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not running from it. I'm facing it head on, with my son by my side and a woman who makes me believe in love again. And for now, that's enough. It's funny how life moves forward even when you feel stuck. At first, every step with Rachel felt tentative, like I was learning to walk again after years of sitting still. But over time, something shifted. The cautiousness began to fade, replaced by something new, hope. Rachel didn't try to replace Emily. She didn't push for me to rush into anything. Instead, she became the steady presence in my life, someone who made the good moments brighter and the hard moments easier to bear. My son adored her, and watching them together was something I didn't realize I needed. She wasn't his mom, and she never tried to be. She was just Rachel, and that was enough. One day, after almost 2 years together, she sat me down in the kitchen. The smell of pancakes filled the air, our Saturday tradition, and my son was in the other room, laughing at some cartoon. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone careful but firm, "about us, about what we're building here." My heart skipped a beat. Conversations that started with, "I've been thinking," never failed to make me uneasy. But I nodded, gesturing for her to continue. "I love you," she said, and her words hung in the air between us, solid and real. "I love your son. I love the life we're building together. But I need to know, are we moving towards something? Or are we just standing still?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't giving me an ultimatum. It wasn't her style. But she was asking for clarity, and I realized in that moment that she deserved it. "I love you too," I said, the words coming easier than I thought they would. And I meant them. I had meant them for a while, but had been too afraid to say them out loud. "And I don't want to stand still anymore." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward, with her, toward something real. The next few months were a whirlwind of decisions. I sold the house I'd shared with Emily, a house that had felt more like a museum of the past than a home for years. Rachel and I found a place together, a small but cozy house with a backyard big enough for my son to run around in. It was a fresh start, and it felt good. I still thought about Emily sometimes. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But the thoughts didn't sting the way they used to. They were just memories now, pieces of a life that no longer defined me. She had reached out a few more times, asking to talk, asking for forgiveness. I told her I didn't have any anger left for her. But forgiveness? That was something I gave myself, not her. One day, she called and asked to see our son. It was a complicated request, one I wrestled with for weeks. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep her at arm's length forever. But I knew it wasn't about me. It was about him, about giving him the chance to make his own decisions about his relationship with her. The first visit was awkward. My son barely remembered her, and she seemed nervous, unsure of how to bridge the gap she had created. But over time, they found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the kind of relationship I had once envisioned for them, but it was something. And for that, I was grateful. As the years passed, life settled into something that felt close to normal. Rachel and I got married in a small ceremony with just a handful of close friends and family. My son stood beside me as my best man, his grin wide and full of pride. When I looked at Rachel, walking toward me in that little backyard where we'd spent so many evenings talking about our future, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd once imagined. Life was messier than that, full of scars and complications and second chances. But it was real. It was ours. And it was enough. One evening, years after everything fell apart, I found myself sitting on the back porch, a cup of coffee in hand. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My son, now older, was inside doing homework, and Rachel was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. I thought about how far I'd come, about the man I used to be and the man I had become. I thought about the heartbreak, the anger, the fear, and how it had all shaped me in ways I never expected. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning how to carry it without letting it consume you. It's about finding joy in the little things, in the quiet moments, in the people who choose to stay. As the first stars appeared in the sky, I smiled to myself. I didn't have all the answers, and I probably never would. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't need them. I was happy, and that was enough. Life continued its steady rhythm, and with it, so did the quiet moments of reflection. The years seemed to blur together, marked not by the shadows of what had been lost, but by the light of what had been built anew. My son grew taller, his laugh deeper, his questions more complex. Rachel and I grew together, not without challenges, but always with a commitment to facing them as a team. One summer evening, long after the chaos of the day had settled, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an old photo album. It wasn't something I had opened in years, not since packing it away in a box after moving into our new home. Rachel had found it while reorganizing the garage and left it on the counter, her silent way of saying, "This is here if you're ready." I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I opened it anyway. The first photo was of Emily and me on our wedding day. I almost didn't recognize the man in the picture. He looked younger, lighter, untouched by the storms that would come later. Emily was smiling, her arm looped through mine, her eyes bright with something I couldn't quite name anymore. Hope? Love? Maybe both. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the memories come. There were pictures of our first apartment, the cramped kitchen where we used to dance to music playing from an old radio. There were photos of our son as a baby, his chubby hands reaching for the camera, Emily laughing in the background. For the first time, the memories didn't hurt. They didn't fill me with anger or regret. They just were. Pieces of a life I had lived, chapters in a story that had led me to where I was now. Rachel walked in as I was closing the album. She didn't say anything, just leaned against the counter and watched me with those steady, understanding eyes of hers. "Do you ever think about the past?" I asked her, my voice quieter than I intended. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But mostly, I think about the future." Her words settled over me like a blanket. Rachel had always been like that. A grounding presence, someone who reminded me to focus on what was ahead instead of what was behind. I reached for her hand, pulling her close. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for believing in me, for staying." She smiled, and for a moment, I was overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what we had built together. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was real and it was ours. As my son grew older, the questions about his mother became more frequent. He wanted to know why she had left, why we weren't a family anymore. I had always been careful with my words, not wanting to paint Emily as a villain or burden him with truths too heavy for his young shoulders. But one day, when he was old enough to understand, I sat him down and told him the truth. Not the gory details, but the essence of it. I told him that people make mistakes, even the people we love. That sometimes those mistakes hurt more than we can handle. That his mother loved him in her own way, even if she couldn't always show it. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. When I finished, he nodded and said, I get it. And somehow I believed him. Watching him navigate his relationship with Emily was a bittersweet experience. They saw each other more often now, and while it wasn't always smooth, it was something. I stayed out of it, letting him set the terms, letting him decide how much of himself he wanted to give. It wasn't my relationship to manage. It was his. Years later, when my son graduated from high school, we all found ourselves in the same room for the first time in what felt like forever. Emily was there, standing off to the side, her eyes on him as he crossed the stage. Rachel was next to me, her hand in mine, her smile wide with pride. After the ceremony, Emily approached me. She looked older, more weathered, as if life had finally caught up with her. For a moment we just stood there, two people who had once been everything to each other and were now little more than shared history. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere, "for raising him, for being there when I couldn't." I nodded, unsure of what to say. There was no anger left, no bitterness. Just an understanding that we had both moved on in our own ways. "He's a good kid," I said finally. "We both did our part." She smiled, and for the first time, I felt something close to closure. Not the kind that ties everything up in a neat bow, but the kind that lets you take a deep breath and finally let go. The years continued to pass, and life remained full of its ups and downs. Rachel and I grew older together, watching as our son forged his own path in the world. He visited often, bringing stories of his adventures, and eventually a partner of his own. Seeing him happy, seeing him build a life that was his own, was the greatest reward I could have asked for. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me and said, "Do you think you'll ever write it all down? Everything you've been through?" I considered her question, the weight of it, the enormity of trying to capture a lifetime in words. "Maybe someday," I said, "but for now, I'm happy just living it." And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back or ahead. I was simply here, in the moment with the people I loved. And that was enough.